For those most affected by a homicide, the first 48 is just the beginning. A man shot 4 times and left for dead on the street.
She responds, "Babe, I need you to meet me in the parking lot."
Police arrest his wife and her pin.
Where'd it go?
I don't know.
A lot of what she said was lies, and she wasn't very good at it.
But finally, an admission. And a deal.
We needed Catherine Makaroff's testimony to convict Jeffrey Blood.
But her testimony could do more harm than good.
She said, I pretty much lied about everything. She's evil.
This is the story of what happened in the weeks, months, and years after the first 48. Early in the morning on October 7th, 2012, police dispatch in Rochester, New York, got a call from the city's 19th ward.
There's some hard shot. Can I look out the window? There's a man lying in the street.
Investigator Kirk Puro had plans to play soccer with his 2 sons that day, but was called in to work the case.
It was 5 in the morning, a Sunday morning of a holiday weekend. I got a call from 911 that there had been a murder at Lincoln and Copley Street.
Yeah, we've got an ID. William F. Click.
The victim was 37-year-old Will Click. He lived in the village of Honeoye Falls, 30 minutes south of Rochester.
Look at his shirt. He's got two holes in his shirt there. He was shot 4 times. He was shot once in the head, once in the neck, and twice in the torso. And the casings are 45s, right?
Yeah.
We were fortunate in that there was some casings from the bullets that had been fired that we found.
Cell phone?
That's keys. He's got cash in there as well.
We knew it wasn't a robbery because Will still had his cell phone and his money on him.
Where's his car?
Like all these cars have been checked.
Okay.
Well, they belong to somebody on the street.
No one saw the shooting, but a resident told Puro there was a lot of drug activity on the street.
Possible that Will came down here looking for drugs, and this could be a drug deal gone bad.
Investigator Marv Patterson went back to homicide to examine the cell phone found at the scene. Puro and Sergeant Jeff Wader went to the apartment address on Will Click's driver's license.
This is it right here.
No one was home, so they went next door.
Morning. Will is murdered.
Are you kidding me?
I'm not.
When did this happen?
Last night into this morning. Any car that he rolls around in?
The only car that I've seen him in is a black, like an MR2.
Will drove a black Toyota sports car.
Can I see a girlfriend or anything you ever see?
He had a girlfriend. Her first name is Kathy. Her dad, stripper. She's a prostitute, call girl. I think he got the phone or something like that. She took off.
When the detectives searched Will's apartment, they discovered Kathy was more than a girlfriend to Will.
He's got a marriage license. July 26th with Kathy.
So he married the girl?
Yeah.
Will Click married Catherine Makaroff 3 months prior to his murder.
This is his wife. There's one right here.
When the detectives found another cell phone belonging to Will, they learned why he and Kathy had been fighting.
This may be an ad for Kathy. From his text messages to other people, his Facebook page, I was able to gather that Will found out just days before the murder that Kathy had been acting as a prostitute. He's sending out the ad with messages to people. He seems really, really upset about it.
Back at Homicide, investigator Patterson was looking at text messages on the cell phone found next to Will's body.
Catherine Makaroff had been texting him almost up to the point of the murder. Dozens of texts.
Now she's asking at 1:23 a.m., where are you? Will says, when are you done? Let me know if you get done earlier and try to get some H, so I'm not so sick.
Will had been what we call dope sick. He was looking for heroin. He was going through withdrawal. Catherine essentially told him, if you come here, I will meet you. I will get you money or drugs.
Kathy was staying in room 226 at a hotel in Henrietta, 8 miles away from where Will was murdered.
She responds, babe, I need you to meet me in the parking lot. He's like, why? Cat Carly says, I'll be there. 4:04 a.m., Will says, bye-bye.
Less than an hour later, Will was dead. Detectives headed to the hotel, where they hoped to find Catherine Makaroff.
She may not even know that he's been killed yet. So we're going to have to kind of cross a bunch of bridges at one time. But finding her is the first step, and hopefully she's here.
As soon as they arrived at the hotel, Puro and the other investigators found something else they were looking for.
This is our victim's car. The car and the texts really could solidify that Will was likely there. That was probably the last place he had been when he was still alive.
At the hotel front desk, Puro and waiter were told room 226 was registered to a man.
Jeffrey Blunt.
And that man, Jeffrey Blunt, had 2 rooms at the hotel.
Is it 248? 248. Please. What's up, man?
Fine. How you doing?
Can I talk to you for a minute?
Sir.
Sorry, what's your name, sir?
Jeffrey.
Jeffrey Blunt answered the door. Actually, we want to talk to her.
As they had hoped, Kathy was there, along with another woman, Tiana.
It was obvious what was going on. Both Kathy and Tiana were acting as prostitutes. They were using both the rooms to conduct business, and Blunt was acting as their pimp. Can we use the room just for privacy? Thanks. All right, Kathy. Your husband was murdered this morning.
What was it over?
We're hoping you can tell us that. I've unfortunately had to notify a lot of people that someone in their family has just died. And the reactions can range from shock to, extreme emotion. She was not surprised in the least. That's not the normal way to react. When was the last time you saw him?
I saw him briefly. He asked me for money.
Kathy said she gave Will money so he could buy heroin.
If he doesn't get his 2 bags a day, he's sick.
Okay, so the text message on his phone to you at 4 something in the morning where you talked about being here, was that after you met him or was that before you met him?
Do I need a lawyer?
I don't know, do you?
Early in the morning on October 7th, 2012, in Rochester, New York, 37-year-old Will Click was gunned down on Copley Street in an area riddled with drug activity.
You never think your children are going to die. You think, yeah, they're in trouble again, but dead?
Will was Marianne and Jim Click's oldest son.
William was a strong, sensitive kid. He was funny. He liked skateboarding, and we went to see Tony Hawk and all the big skateboarders at the time. And he asked me to wear skateboard clothes. So here I am, an old lady wearing skateboard clothes.
Marianne and Jim welcomed their second son, Jim, 3 years after Will was born.
We lived in the country, so they did a lot together.
Picnic together and fish together. We had a good relationship.
But the family dynamic changed when Will reached high school and began using drugs.
Why he started using drugs, peer pressure, to be cool, to fit in with the rest of the kids. William was always shy and quiet. He had insecurity issues.
Will's drug use steadily got worse, and he began using heroin. Over the next 15 years, Will was continually in and out of rehab.
His efforts to stay clean were a lifelong struggle. He would go to a clinic, he would get dried out, he would do well for a while.
William had a really positive attitude when he'd come out. He'd always have that grin on his face, all the hopes and dreams that he was going to do.
Several hours after Will's murder in Rochester, lead investigator Kirk Puro and his team located his wife, Catherine Makaroff, at a hotel.
Kathy's story of what happened that night was Will had come to see her, she had given him some money, and that he had left.
With her at the hotel was another woman, Tiana, and a man, Jeffrey Blunt.
This guy, Jeffrey. See her this morning?
No. You went to a concert with her. I didn't get back until 6:30.
Kathy said Jeffrey Blunt and Tiana got back to the hotel an hour and a half after Will's murder. But Puro wasn't buying it.
Finding them the day of the murder in that hotel where she had asked for Will to be an hour before his murder, it was just too much of a coincidence.
Before leaving, Puro and Waiter asked the hotel for its surveillance camera footage.
We could get that, that'd be fantastic.
One day after the murder, Puro and fellow investigator Terry Deerkop went to meet with Will's parents.
Hello, I'm Kirk. Talked on the phone. I'm sorry for your loss, okay?
When I met Detective Puro, and he reminded me of, I don't know, of what William could have been, I guess, if he went down the right road. It was like a connection right off the bat.
I have had 2 separate family members murdered. I think that helps me feel some empathy for the victims, families, and some motivation to work on these types of cases as well. We found his car, the Toyota, in a hotel. Kathy was also at the hotel.
She was with him, I told you. I told you she's got something to do with this. I know she does. I suspected Kathy because she was evil.
Will met Kathy Makaroff in 2010 on an internet chat room for recovering addicts. Like Will, Kathy began abusing drugs as a teenager and battled drug addiction throughout her life.
I always said to William, 2 drug addicts, they don't mix.
In July 2012, Kathy moved from her home in Chicago to Rochester to be with Will. Within a month, both were using drugs again and were often at odds with each other.
It was a rocky relationship.
And Marianne and Jim soon saw a different side to Kathy's personality.
Kathy Makaroff could smooth talk anybody.
The stories would just change over and over again on what she was doing, where she was, what she was up to.
Back at Homicide, Puro zeroed in on Kathy's friends who were with her in the hotel room.
Jeffrey Blunt, he's got a conviction for robbery with a deadly weapon.
29-year-old Jeffrey Blunt had also served time for leaving the scene of a fatal accident.
He was on parole. Tiana, she was the other girl that was in the room. She doesn't have any convictions here.
Several days later, investigator Marv Patterson tracked down Tiana to question her alone about Will's murder.
You came back to the hotel about what time?
I'm like 12:01. I didn't get back until 6:30. I woke up probably at like 6 o'clock and he wasn't there.
Tiana's account of the night contradicted what Kathy had told investigators, but she denied knowing anything about Will's murder.
You got my number, you can call me. Be careful.
The next day, Pirro got the video of the hotel lobby from the morning of Will's murder.
Jeffrey Blunt and Kathy are coming in together.
What time is that?
6:08 a.m. Kathy told us that she hadn't left the hotel at all, and we'll have to see what she says. I definitely had a gut feeling that both Kathy and Jeffrey Blunt were involved.
On October 7th, 2012, Will Click was gunned down in Rochester, New York, after meeting up with his estranged wife, Catherine Makaroff, at a hotel where she was working as a prostitute. Kathy told police she never left the hotel, but surveillance footage told a different story.
A lot of what she said was lies, and she wasn't very good at it.
With the surveillance footage in hand, lead investigator Kirk Pirro and Sergeant Jeff Wader confronted Kathy at homicide.
Where'd you go?
I don't know. Probably a gas station.
Her mind just started working, and she had to come up with something. So she said that they went to get cigarettes.
I'm under arrest.
Kathy refused to answer any more questions, and Pirro was forced to let her go. Without Kathy talking, the case stalled. But Pirro continued to dig into Kathy's background.
I was contacted by former boyfriends of hers, and they all painted a picture of her as the Black Widow type person.
Then, 3 months into the investigation, Jeffrey Blunt was arrested on a drug charge.
But it was a parole violation for him, so he was held in custody.
With Jeffrey Blunt safely behind bars, Pirro brought Kathy in for questioning again, thinking now she might talk. And he was right.
That was his property. Period. Anything that got in the way, he would make it go away.
Kathy said Jeffrey Blunt was furious when he found out Will was at the hotel.
So what happened?
We left.
Who left?
All of us. Jeff said, I'm gonna take you to get some dope.
Kathy said all three of them drove to Copley Street in Jeffrey Blunt's car.
Will got out of the car, and then he rolled the window down and he said, wrong house, come back to the car.
Then what happened? He shot him?
Over.
Then, just days after Kathy's admission, the detectives got another big break.
Hello. Hey, what's going on, T?
Tiana, who was with Kathy and Jeffrey Blunt at the hotel room, called investigator Marv Patterson.
What about Kathy? She told you that she killed him.
Tiana told Patterson that when the detectives came to the hotel the morning of Will Click's murder, Kathy pulled her aside and said she had shot her husband. And Tiana said Jeffrey Blunt tossed the murder weapon off a bridge into the Erie Canal.
Hey, you did good, girl. All right?
The police dive team scoured the river, and sure enough,
45 with a white grip has got a cocked hammer.
Nice.
the gun was a ballistic match to the casings found at the murder scene.
Having the murder weapon, it was huge for us to put all this together.
Both Jeffrey Blunt and Catherine Makaroff were charged with second-degree murder and conspiracy in Will Click's death. Assistant District Attorney Sarah Van Stridonk, a 10-year veteran of the Monroe County Prosecutor's Office, would oversee the case.
Both Catherine Makaroff and Jeffrey Blunt wanted Will dead. Jeffrey Blunt was angry with Will because he knew where Kathy was. He knew how to get to her, and quite frankly, he was bad for business.
Working alongside her was fellow prosecutor Amanda Balling, who had been with the office 5 years.
Jeffrey Blunt was the shooter. He killed William Click. But if Catherine Makaroff hadn't begged William Click to come to Henrietta, Jeffrey Blunt would have never killed him.
Catherine Makaroff would be represented by Joseph D'Amelio. A defense attorney for 27 years, D'Amelio knew he had his work cut out for him.
Kathy was interviewed several times over the course of several months by the police. She would contradict herself in her statements. She would tell lies, and she's admitted that she told them lies.
But D'Amelio believed Kathy lied to protect herself.
She was scared of Blunt. She had been beaten by Blunt before. She had been threatened by Blunt before.
Jeffrey Blunt was a repeat offender who prosecutors wanted to keep off the streets for good. So they made a difficult decision.
It was decided that we needed Catherine Makaroff's testimony to convict Jeffrey Blunt.
Prosecutors offered Catherine Makaroff a plea bargain. Kathy could plead to the lesser charge of conspiracy to murder and serve 4 to 12 years if she testified against Jeffrey Blunt.
Catherine could tell us exactly what went down on Copley Street, and without her, we didn't have anyone that could do that.
D'Amelio knew a jury would heavily scrutinize Kathy's involvement in Will's murder and her repeated lies to police.
Did she pull the trigger? No, but let's face it. She is in this crime.
Facing 25 years to life for a murder conviction, Kathy accepted the plea deal. Prosecutors would now go to trial with 2 key witnesses, Kathy Makaroff and Tiana. But their case would suddenly be in jeopardy when just weeks before the trial, Tiana disappeared.
Tiana gave us the murder weapon, so her testimony was crucial.
In May 2014, prosecutors in Rochester, New York, had reached a plea agreement with Catherine Makaroff to testify against her pimp, Jeffrey Blunt, in the 2012 murder of her husband, Will Click.
I was mad, but then again, it's either she testifies and gets the good deal, or maybe they both walk.
As the Clicks prepared to face their son's alleged killer in court, Marianne found much-needed support from lead investigator Kirk Pirro.
When I needed a friend, I would call him when I couldn't deal with it, when I didn't know what to do anymore, when I was falling apart.
I've worked on hundreds of homicides, but Will's murder affected me for several reasons. He and I were roughly the same age. I have some friends that grew up with him. I think that made it a little bit more real for me.
But the case Pirro and prosecutors had built against Jeffrey Blunt was in danger of falling apart just weeks before trial when they couldn't locate a key witness.
Tiana, unfortunately, was a transient. We had difficulty locating her, and she didn't want to be involved. She didn't want to testify.
After 2 weeks of searching, investigators tracked Tiana down in Brooklyn, New York, where she was arrested. They would hold Tiana in the Monroe County Jail until she testified. But then, Blunt's trial was postponed 2 months, and Tiana didn't plan to stick around long enough to testify.
If she's out of New York State, then we don't have that power to compel her to come back to court.
So Van Stridonk and Balling made an unusual request.
It wasn't appropriate to hold Tiana in jail for a month and a half, so we made an application to the judge to have her testimony videotaped.
The testimony would then be played back for jurors when the trial began in July. The judge granted the request, and Tiana took the witness stand on May 20th, 2014.
Please tell us what the testimony about in this case should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes.
Prosecutor Amanda Balling asked Tiana about the evening of October 7th, 2012, hours after Will's murder, when she and Jeffrey Blunt were in Blunt's car at the hotel in Henrietta.
He was in the driver's seat, looking around in the car.
Did you notice if he found anything?
Yes, he found an empty casing.
When you say an empty casing, what do you mean?
A bullet.
So-
The shell.
There was an empty bullet casing in the car?
Yes.
Take the picture and just mark the area where you saw him take the bullet casing from. It was stuck in between the seat and the center console?
Yes.
What did he do with the bullet casing that he had found?
I believe he wrapped it in the sweater that he had.
And then he went to the trunk?
Yes.
Tiana said while at the trunk, Jeffrey Blunt wrapped what appeared to be a gun in a maroon sweatshirt.
I saw the handle when he had the sweatshirt.
Tiana said Jeffrey Blunt then told her to drive them to Rochester, to the Chilai Avenue Bridge over the Erie Canal.
Jeffrey Blunt told her where to drive, told her where to stop, got out of the car with the maroon sweatshirt in his hand, walked across the bridge.
Once Blunt reached the other side of the bridge, he called Tiana and had her cross it to pick him up.
Did he have anything in his hands when you picked him up?
No.
Did he have the maroon sweatshirt with him when you picked him up?
No. This maroon sweatshirt that she said that Jeffrey Blunt wrapped the gun in was on the banks of the drained canal.
Do you recognize that?
Yes.
What do you recognize that to be?
Jay's sweater. The most important thing that Tiana testified to was taking Jeffrey Blunt to drop off that gun in the Erie Canal. Hands down.
But Tiana was a reluctant witness and had lied to police numerous times in their investigation. A point the defense would be sure to hammer home in its cross-examination.
Jeffrey Blunt's attorney focused predominantly on the fact that the jury would have to believe Tiana.
Police asked you to tell the truth, didn't they?
Yes.
And you didn't.
I was under oath then.
You didn't tell them the truth, did you?
No.
In May 2014, in Rochester, New York, key prosecution witness Tiana testified she saw Jeffrey Blunt dispose of the gun used to kill Will Click. But Jeffrey Blunt's defense was out to discredit Tiana and her testimony.
The jury would have to believe everything that she told them.
In his cross-examination, Jeffrey Blunt's defense attorney pointed out that Tiana lied to police during their investigation of Will Click's murder.
You talked to the police, and they specifically asked you about a gun, and you said you never saw Jeffrey Blunt with a gun. Is that correct?
Right.
And that was a lie.
Yeah.
Now, you never saw a gun, is that correct?
That's why you seen the handle of a gun. I did not see the full gun. Whether or not she saw the butt of a gun or what she saw, she knew that that was a gun. And guess what? That's the same thing that was recovered during the dive.
But the defense would raise the question of who the actual shooter was. Jeffrey Blunt or Will Click's wife, Kathy Makaroff. So Blunt's attorney asked Tiana about the conversation she had with Kathy at the hotel the morning of Will's murder.
She told you that she killed her husband, didn't she?
Yes,
She said she had shot him 4 times in the chest. Is that correct?
that's correct. Yes.
Jeffrey Blunt's defense attorney definitely wanted to capitalize on that statement. He wanted to put doubt in the jurors' minds about Jeffrey Blunt's involvement in this homicide.
Although the defense attacked her credibility as a witness, prosecutors believed the jury would see Tiana's testimony matched up with the evidence in the case.
Tiana put the pieces together and gave corroboration to Catherine Makaroff's testimony, which was extremely important for us.
2 months later, in July 2014, Jeffrey Blunt would go on trial for the murder of Will Click. If convicted, Blunt faced a sentence of 25 years to life in prison on the murder charge alone. Tiana's testimony would be played for jurors. They would also hear from the prosecution's other star witness, Catherine Makaroff. But she had a track record as a proven liar.
Catherine Makaroff was the most problematic part of this case because you had to convince a jury that even though Catherine Makaroff is getting a benefit for her testimony, she's still telling you the truth.
Kathy took the stand when Jeffrey Blunt's trial began in July 2014, almost 2 years after Will Click's murder. As she had previously told police, Kathy testified that Blunt was angry when he found Will at their hotel early in the morning on October 7th, 2012.
He's causing a problem because he wants to take her home. He wants her out of there. And it's nothing that Kathy wanted at that time. She's embedded in the life, so to speak, and she kind of liked it.
Kathy said she and Jeffrey then discussed what they should do about Will.
Jeffrey Blunt asked Kathy, how can we make this stop? How can we make Will stop? Do we have to hurt him? What do we do? And it was Kathy that said he won't stop until he's dead. And it was at that moment that the two of them decided that Will was there, and now was the time. Will needed to be gone.
Kathy had texted Will that she would get him heroin, and that it was already paid for.
This was a woman who he loved and trusted, and so that's why Will got in Jeffrey Blunt's car.
When they arrived at Copley Street, Blunt told Will which house he needed to go to for the drugs. But Kathy said Blunt told her to tell Will to come back to the car.
It was at that point that Jeffrey Blunt opened the driver door, crouched down, and he began firing at Will Click.
Jeffrey Blunt shot Will 4 times. And then he and Kathy drove off as Will died in the street.
One of the questions I asked her is, why didn't you help Will after he'd been shot? And she point blank said, because I wanted Will dead. That was a powerful statement. I thought that was a reason that you should believe her testimony. Who wants to admit to being that cold-blooded?
Although Kathy admitted she wanted Will dead and conspired to kill him, she said Blunt pulled the trigger. Would the jury be able to take a woman who callously led her husband to his death at her word and convict Jeffrey Blunt of second-degree murder?
Kathy is not a likable figure. She's not a likable figure in court. She's not a likable figure in this story.
She had lied so many times before. Why is she telling the truth now?
In July 2014, in Rochester, New York, the state's star witness, Kathy Makaroff, testified Jeffrey Blunt shot and killed her husband, Will Click. But the defense was out to prove Kathy was a manipulative liar.
Jurors were really evaluating whether she was telling the truth or not.
The jury had only Kathy's testimony that Jeffrey Blunt fired the gun, and his defense attorney worked to create doubt in her story.
At one point, I remember her saying, I've pretty much lied about everything up until today.
Besides Kathy's repeated lies, Blunt's defense attorney highlighted her manipulation of Will Click, having her tell the court how she held Will's hand during the drive to Copley Street.
The members of the jury, while watching this, were on the edge of their seats. This is something that is unique that you don't get to see inside the mind of a killer, a co-conspirator.
Kathy's testimony just about killed me. Hearing that she held his hand the whole time, knowing that she was going to have my son killed, this just destroyed me.
After 2 weeks of testimony, the jury received the case. Jurors deliberated for just 4 hours before announcing they had reached a verdict. They found Jeffrey Blunt guilty of second-degree murder and conspiracy, and criminal possession of a weapon in the third degree.
When the jury said guilty, I turned around and looked at Marianne Click. She was so relieved. She had gotten the justice that she needed.
Jeffrey Blunt was sentenced on September 11th, 2014. An emotional Marianne Click, with husband Jim by her side, read a statement.
Jeffrey Blunt, you're a monster. The years that you spend in prison will never compensate for the life you have taken. Your life's ruined. Our lives are ruined. And for what?
The judge had harsh words for Blunt before handing down his sentence.
Mr. Blunt, I find you to be a despicable excuse for a human being, and I don't want anyone in this courtroom to have to endure your presence any longer.
Jeffrey Blunt received the maximum sentence for the murder conviction and additional time on the conspiracy and weapons charges. In total, he was sentenced to 44 and a half years to life in prison.
William Click's death does not go unpunished.
I was very happy for Jim and Marianne, after all they've been through, that they could hopefully start to move on.
Moving on for the Clicks has been difficult. On Valentine's Day 2014, Will's younger brother, Jim, who was going through personal issues and addiction problems, took his own life.
I truly believe that Jeffrey Blunt and Kathy's actions of murdering his brother put him over the edge to the point where he couldn't take it. It kills me.